Greetings of peace, loved ones. This is Baraka Blue. I wanted to introduce this podcast where I sit down with Shaykh Abdullah bin Hamid Ali. Shaykh Abdullah Ali is an American Muslim scholar and professor at Zaytuna College, which is America's first Muslim college here in the Bay Area, Berkeley, California. He was born and raised in the United States to parents that converted to Islam. He studied the traditional sciences, the traditional Islamic sciences in Morocco, and is a PhD candidate at the Graduate Theological Union, where his research focuses on race and religion in society. I sat down with him today to discuss kind of what's been on my mind, what's been on everybody's mind after the attacks in Paris and Beirut. And me personally, just to share an anecdote, I've been affected by it on a personal level because, one, I've toured in Beirut and Paris. And in both those places, I had a great time and I met many people, made many friends. And, I know those cities well. So it's not abstract for me, either one. The first thing I did when I heard about Beirut was I messaged the people that I know personally there. The next day, Paris, same thing. But I was just fascinated by the way that both those stories were covered differently in Western media, and it caused me to reflect a lot how different lives are given different value as far as attention and mourning and things like that. And it caused me to reflect on the fact that we don't mourn all lives equally. And then in relation to that, you have all this outcry against ISIS and Muslims and a few mosques being burned and a few Muslim women being attacked or spit on or yelled at all over Western cities in America, and various threats. The police shot a man who made threats against Muslims. There's another man who made threats to a mosque answering machine, and they had to arrest that man. There was a woman who posted something about killing Muslims, and multiple people, social media, make threats. And just the general atmosphere of insanity and trying to make sense of it all. So I wrote a post about this, which turned out to be quite long, and it basically went viral. And at this point, it has like tens of thousands of views, thousands of shares, a really robust conversation. And in the aftermath of it, a day and a half later, I woke up and Facebook had said that my account is going to be deactivated if I can't prove that Baraka Blue is not my government name with official documentation. Now, of course, Baraka Blue isn't my government name. It's my pen name, stage name. So I'm not able to do that. So there's a few options, and I'm looking into those. But I found it real interesting that this happened after I made this post, because I've had that Facebook profile for years, and never once have Facebook or anyone else said anything to me about that. And I know millions and millions of people don't use their government name on Facebook. So we spoke with somebody at Facebook who works in data, and they said what probably happened most likely is because that message went so viral and was on so many people's radar, that there were some individuals who didn't want the message that I was putting out there to be broadcast, whether it's Islamophobes or others. And so they reported or somehow brought it to the attention of Facebook, because people that want to shut down the discourse tend to be very crafty in how they do it. So they were able to on a technicality, silence my voice. Just to summarize, you can check out that post on my Facebook, and it's now been published by Ummah Wide. The essence of it was that there's been selective mourning. And it's not just France and Beirut. It's been really 500 years of selective mourning. And we don't value all lives as equal. As a society, as individuals, you know, Western white Americans, if an old woman, you know, tripped on the sidewalk, I think most people would run to help her, whether she be black or brown or white. But there's a certain disconnect where we see some people as us and some people as them. And that was really the thrust of what I was saying, is that the Europeans are us, the Israelis are us, the Australians are us, but the Pakistanis and the Palestinians and the Iraqis and the Afghanis and the Kenyans and the Senegalese and the Nigerians, that's not us. Because we don't have an understanding that we're all us in the global village, things like ISIS can thrive. Because ISIS only thrives in a place where there's them and there's us. They only sprout up in places where we value the resources of a place more than the people of that place. Where people are not treated as part of the human family, as part of the global village. And so this podcast with a Muslim scholar to talk about his perspectives on this, an American Muslim sheikh who is very prominent and is part of one of the most prominent American Muslim institutions, Zaytuna College, and just see, you know, his reflections, because all you hear on the news is, where are the moderate Muslims? You know, where are the sane Muslim voices? And the reality is that if we are waiting for them to put the sane voices on Fox News or even CNN or the corporate media, then we already lost, you know. So this is my hope that, you know, this can be directly to the people, because we can connect with each other directly now through social media until Facebook tries to shut that down. Shout out to Mark Zuckerberg. This podcast is dedicated to the victims of the senseless violence in Paris and in Beirut and in Kenya and in Iraq, the over 1 million people that have been killed by the invasion of Iraq under George W. Bush from my country, the United States of America, and really all the senseless violence that's been done in the name of us versus them. So I just want to say peace to everyone who realizes we're all us and we're all the human family. So with that, I give you this conversation with Sheikh Abdullah Ali. Peace. When you, as not only a Muslim, but as, you know, an imam and a teacher and an educator within the Muslim community, when you hear on the news or see on social media that something like the Paris attacks happens, before they say who it is, what's your gut feeling?
Well, for me, I mean, my gut feeling is that I almost know what they're going to say, who supposedly did it. And I'm always waiting for that, and usually it comes back very quickly that it supposedly was some Muslims who did it, and they took responsibility for it. So. Yeah.
I mean, I think that's, you see on social media, you know, if you follow, if you're in the Muslim community on social media, that before it's kind of announced, a bunch of Muslims are already posting, like, please don't be a Muslim. And you see Muslims, like, listening to the news, like, waiting, please don't be a Muslim. And the reason I wrote this recent post that went viral is because I was reflecting on the fact that, like, if ever a, you know, black person is shot by a police officer, or, you know, you hear about some atrocity anywhere on earth, in America, internationally, I've never thought as a white man, please don't be a white man. You know, never once. Yeah, and no white person has. Right. I'm like, you know, not because I don't want it to be a white, you know what I mean, but because I know there's not going to be any repercussions. Right. I'm not going to be grouped in. No one's going to say, if I walk outside, you're a white man with blue eyes and blonde hair, just like this person who did that, you know?
Right.
And in many ways, I feel like that's the definition of enfranchisement.
Right.
When some individual who has the same characteristics or quote unquote identity as you, whatever they do, it's not associated with you.
Right.
Whereas disenfranchisement is anyone who looks like you, has the same identity as you, could be associated with you in the furthest stretch. That is somehow lumped in with you.
Right. And this is an extremely profound point, that you make, and I mean, of course, it's something that I know in terms of my own sort of like experience of my people being an African American in this country. But another thing that's interesting about the phenomenon of always asking the question or sort of saying things like, well, I hope it's not a Muslim, is that I interestingly, I actually don't have that reaction when it occurs. Now, of course, I would like for it not to be a Muslim, but it's not like I feel a certain type of anxiety about it, because I guess even though African Americans still struggle with enfranchisement in the United States, I think that I could say that largely we are more enfranchised in the more recent Muslim immigrant population. And I think that it's kind of like African Americans know that their way of being an American is an authentic way of being an American, you see, and it's authentic not only to themselves but even to the mainstream. You see, that it's okay. That whites generally are fine with us being not trying to imitate white people, and not trying to actually sort of integrate into sort of white spaces, quote unquote. You see,
you're American. They recognize you when they see you as. They may have a bunch of stereotypes, but you're still an American. They're not going to question that. Whereas with the immigrants, kids go back home.
And for that reason, I can largely understand the reactions that they have. So I know, like, often what happens was when the condemnations come out, usually from largely immigrant run operations or organizations, and the reaction of many Americans, converts, in particular, white, black, often, might even be black, who react, and they say, well, what you apologizing for? You don't have to apologize. And we tell them that. And that's the way we feel about it. But, and I didn't really realize this right away, but it took a little bit of time before I come to the understanding that their reaction is completely reasonable, because they understand and know that when the word Muslim is utilized, that it's a racialized term, and Muslim in the psyche of the mainstream white member of the population, it's not just a generic term, an abstract term. When you think Muslim, they actually get an image of a certain type of individual, and they think real Muslim, right? You understand? And largely the immigrant population, I think that they perceive that, they understand that, and so when Islam and Muslims are being demonized in the media, that is and also them being demonized themselves as ethnic sort of minorities in Western countries. So their reaction has to be in such a way where I guess you would say it is one that is it may be motivated. It's largely motivated by preservation, self-respect. So please don't be a Muslim, because if that's the case, then they're going to attack us. People are going to attack us, and we know. And it's like they understand, even though they may not want to talk about it often, about America's history and its racial history, among other things. And so for me, I find it to be very reasonable. So if we were under attack in the way that they were under attack, well, perhaps we might have the same type of reaction. And I think that's one thing is important for people who don't suffer from that particular level of anxiety, have to keep in mind when they see these type of reactions from Muslim organizations.
Yeah, I talked to a friend of mine earlier today, and we were just talking about something else, but he mentioned in passing, I went out to the store this morning and bought my wife and daughter pepper spray. I said, keep this with you at all times. And again, it's like, I think that's one of these important things to draw home, because, like, no matter, like, when George W. Bush led our country into a war in Iraq off completely lies, like what was clearly lies then, but is undisputably lies now.
Right.
And a new conservative estimate came out recently that 1.2 million people have died. There's no part of me that I have to like worry about my mother or my sister as white women being associated with the actions of this white man who's the leader of our country, which is supposedly a democracy that we're all taking part in.
Right.
So, again, it's like, I think this is a thing that a lot of the average Americans don't get. And when you see people really attacking and singling out Islam, a lot of the new atheists are doing it recently. And one of the things they always say, I'm not a racist. Islam is an ideology. It's a set of beliefs. It has nothing to do with race.
Right.
And, of course, in the abstract, that's true. Right. I mean, you can have blonde hair and blue eyes and be Muslim.
Right.
But, like, as you put it, is really important. It's a racialized term.
Right.
And in the popular conscious, if you say, what does a Muslim look like? Everyone gets an idea. And it's definitely not blue eyes and blonde hair.
Right, exactly. Right.
So what do you... When 9/11 happened versus now, do you feel like there's a similar kind of feeling in the air in the country, or different?
I think that the feeling in the air now is actually much different than it was after 9/11. Actually, when 9/11 happened, I had just returned from my studies in Morocco about maybe 2 weeks prior to that. And I remember the day a brother had called me, woke me up from my sleep and told me, turn on TV. And I turned it on, and he said, somebody just crashed airplane into the Trade Center, And while I was watching, the second airplane hit, and I was just glued to my seat for about maybe 4 hours, just in disbelief. It's like, I said, is this real? It's like, it was like so shocking, of an event. And I think that after 9/11, while there were people who attacked Muslims, that it's still, I guess you would say that it was directed towards a particular type of Muslim. You understand, and so Islamophobia was somewhat, it was sort of brewing already, but it was really formalized, I guess you would say, at that time. So, and actually, unfortunately, some Muslims were killed, and some people weren't even Muslim were killed. It was real
Sikhs,
seated, it was Sikhs among others, but it was rooted in racism back then. But I think that right now, and especially after the election of President Barack Obama, that it's on a totally new level now. And this is not only in the United States, but this is also in Europe. From what I can see, is that there's a new resurgence of white supremacy, a resurgence of white consciousness, and the groundwork had been laid for a number of years. When you look at sort of social scientists were highlighting things such as, about a year such and such, Europeans are going to be outnumbered in Europe by these immigrants, or in America the Mexicans are invading. So there's this resurgence in the United States. So in addition to Islamophobia, you have, this sort of white supremacy. Right, exactly.
And like a lot of politicians are capitalizing on this fear-based, just churning up this, getting kind of like, white people in Europe and in America to really see that we're losing our country.
Yes, right.
And of course, they don't necessarily say it's because the blacks and browns and but they do say the immigrants, and it's a real racialized language. And of course, in America, it's totally, initiated by the fact that we have an African American president. Right. They say all these militias, right-wing militias. The membership goes through the roof,
right? Yeah,
and all these kind of, not only just the extreme like neo-Nazi groups are seeing increase membership. But even ones who say we're not racist, but we need to protect our country.
That's right.
Training, all these.
Our country.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah. Our country. Yeah. So I've noticed a difference personally, and I think that right now that the situation is much more volatile than even when it was back when 9/11 first happened. Because back then, I think that the races were united. At least those who considered themselves to be true Americans, blacks and whites were united, you see, when 9/11 happened. Now we have Black Lives Matter, and so it's hard to imagine that you're going to have that level of solidarity in light of current events, and as long as people are not willing to try to address the grievances of people who have legitimate grievances. So if the response is always going to be to blame the victim, like they'll say Black Lives Matter. So, okay, some white cops killed some black people, but what about you guys killing each other? So it's my fault that the guy down the street killed the other guy down the street. But I have no relationship with them. But you killed me. Why you kill me? I couldn't control any of that. So that justifies your murder of me, and it's sort of like saying, okay, because in Afghanistan, that when the Taliban was there, or prior to the Taliban, there was a whole lot of violence in Afghanistan. So when the Americans come and bomb them, right, bomb the bad guys, and in the midst of it, they kill some innocent people, bystanders. Okay, well, they should have been, they should have handled those terrible guys in their own country. Otherwise, we wouldn't have needed to come to bomb them and blow them up. You see, it just doesn't really make sense, right? Right, exactly.
And that, what, like, again, I think a lot of people, especially white people, are very resistant to talking about race, bringing up race in general, but especially around this thing. But I really feel, and this really is just something interesting that's sparked by what happened in Facebook, which is that 2 attacks happened back to back. The first one was Beirut. It was ISIS that did it. It was in a crowded market that killed innocent people, mostly Muslims, although there's a lot of Christians in Beirut too. I don't know how, the percentage.
Yeah, it's pretty high percentage,
Right.
Yeah.
And then the next day, Paris. And of course, Paris, the death toll was higher. It was 100 and something, 20, versus I think it was in the 40s in Beirut.
Yeah, I think it was 54 in Beirut and then 129 in Paris, yeah.
And so I was just reflecting, because I've been to both of those cities. I performed in both those cities. I made a lot of friends in both those cities. I, hung out, checked it out, was taken around, spent a few days. I have a lot of friends. First thing, when I heard the Paris thing, I reached out to them. First thing when the Beirut thing, I reach out to them personally. And then I started noticing that, there was a little bit of news about Beirut, not much. And then when Paris happened, immediately it just exploded.
Right.
And what was fascinating is that Facebook has this safety check feature. I don't know if you got... I started getting updates that my friends in Paris are okay.
Okay.
So-and-so is okay. So-and-so is okay. So-and-so is okay. It's automatically in my feed, And I was reflecting on that, and I was like, that's amazing. And then, of course, I naturally said, they didn't have that for Beirut.
Right.
And I just started thinking about why. And then I remembered back that earlier this year, Kenya, again, it was an extremist Islamist group. In Kenya, I think it was a mall or something where they killed more people than in Paris, almost 200 people.
Right.
And it was a tragedy, but I was reflecting on, we know 9/11.
Right.
That date means something to us.
Yeah, that's right.
We know 7/7. That date means to us. And then what is it? I guess it's 11/13. Is that what?
Right.
11/13. That's going to be
right. Exactly. Friday the 13th. Right, exactly. Yeah.
But we do not, and I don't know, but nobody knows the date that happened in Kenya.
Right.
Why?
Right.
And it really comes down to the fact that in the Western dominant media,
right,
all lives are not valued the same.
Right, exactly.
Because all lives are not seen as us.
Mm-hmm.
That's the important thing.
Right.
It's really that, Europeans, they're us. They're Western.
Right.
Israelis are us.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Right? But Middle Eastern people, African people,
right.
Asian people, non-white people. It's really racial. That's the thing. You can't escape the fact that it's about race. Australians are us.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But, and of course, I can already hear the defenses of a lot of white people like, no, if I saw, someone, an old lady trip and fall on the subway, it doesn't matter if they're black or brown or white, I would feel compassion, I'd help them up.
Right.
And I think that's generally true on the level of individual interaction.
Right, yeah.
But we have to understand that the way that the systems and the way that the institutions and the historical nature of all this is that as a society, we don't value all these individuals.
Right, no, it's true. It's totally true. I think that, when people even hear the term white supremacy, that there's a tendency to automatically focus on these sort of little KKK, skinheads, neo-Nazi type of groups like that. These individuals who often are not very intelligent to begin with, and and in some ways don't really have a lot of political power. I mean, of course, some of them do have some political influence in certain parts of the country. But when we talk about white supremacy even transcends that. When you actually look at the biggest sort of movers and shakers in the world, when you look at the if you just focus on the United States to begin with, that you're talking about a government predominated by, especially not just white but Anglo-Saxon white men. The Congress, the Senate, in the economic sector, there's predominance in the academic sector, the universities, predominantly white, male-centric, in military command, you see the same thing. And then on the international stage, it's the same thing, they sort of, NATO and these other countries, you see that who's really sort of dominating. And for me, that's not necessarily a problem, I guess you would say. It's not a problem that one particular group, I guess you would say, is able to gain dominance over the majority of the people. Rather, the problem to me, is that when that is the case, and there is not enough representation to ensure that there is actual justice occurring and there's a lot of injustice that happening under this, and it's put off as if we're actually there's a balance in terms of the representation of the different nations and the different peoples in any given situation, and so when it's put off as if, just as everybody's given a fair chance and their fair share, when that's actually not what's occurring, you see. So I think that's important for people to reflect upon.
Right. Yeah, because that's a good point in the sense that, like, if you're a student of history, you'll know that empires rise and fall.
Right.
It might be the Egyptians that are dominant. It might be the Romans. It might be the Greeks. It might be the Persians. It might be the Aztecs. It might be the the French, it might be the Spanish, the British, and now it's the Americans, and by extension Europe.
Right.
But and that's just history, right?
Right.
But the difference is now is that we don't just present it in popular discourse like, we dominate and so we make the rules.
Right.
We act as if we're the global community.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
we all are looking at everyone's interests equally, when that's just rhetoric. Because if you live in Iraq and your country gets invaded and you already had a dictator that you didn't love,
right.
It's not about sticking up for Saddam, obviously, or Gaddafi or anyone. Right. Power tends to corrupt, and the people, that's just the fact.
Right.
But that said, if you just, topple the ruling class, dismantle the army, and then upwards of 1 million people end up dying.
Right, exactly.
And then you sit and stand back when some insane psychopaths, start taking up weapons and become the most dominant voice out of the insanity.
Right.
because they're the most bloodthirsty, really.
Right, exactly.
And then you just wash your hands of it and say, these Muslims and their Sunni and Shia sectarian strife, it's been going on for 1,400 years. What could we have done? You know what I mean?
Right,
It's the most amazing type of hubris.
Right, exactly. And it's satanic as well. I mean, like I would say, not to imply anything like nationist, but it's very satanic, and it's the way that what it is. It's very deceptive and diabolical. It was interesting. I actually was watching a video from a press conference that Vladimir Putin had did recently, I'm assuming. And, of course, this wasn't on the American media, but basically it was one particular point that really stuck out to me. And he had highlighted that, well, listen, all these things you're blaming on us, realistically, you can't really pin any of this on us, because you did Iraq, you did this and that. And one thing that really struck me was the fact that he had mentioned, he said, well, then these same guys, they take over the oil fields. They take over the oil fields, and you know what they start to do? They start to sell oil. And they say, okay, well, who are they selling the oil to? Who's buying the oil from them? You see, and these people who are buying the oil from them, these are all allies of the United States. Why are they not being punished? Why don't they have sanctions against them and everything? These are people who are fueling ISIS, through the purchase, and they have regular relations with them, and so that is an extremely important point that people need to remember, is that you created the conditions for the rise of ISIS. And you're perpetuating their existence, that you're ensuring that they continue to exist by giving them economic support. You can't tell me that you can freeze the assets of all of your enemies around the world, and you can't freeze the assets of ISIS. It just really doesn't make any sense to me. It's really, really, really crazy, and that's why I say diabolical. It's really demonic.
And that's the problem now. I mean, and I think hopefully with emerging media, social media, the way that we're all connected. I mean, just look at the way that Twitter played a role in the Arab Spring. Which hasn't ended so positively. Everyone was the Arab Spring, but I mean now it's a nightmare in most places.
Exactly. Yeah.
But nonetheless, it seems pretty clear to most people, I think, that the USA talks a rhetoric, but they're not actually about principles in the sense that, like, their foreign policy is. It's all about democracy, right? It's just democracy, like a mantra. Like you have the Vicar beads and democracy. But then if
democracy weird.
If who gets elected in Egypt is not who you want to be elected,
that's right.
Then and there's a military coup against the democratically elected leader of a country, all of a sudden, mum's the word.
Right.
All of a sudden, you have nothing to say.
Right. Or similarly, good. Take it back further than that. I mean, when the Palestinians they chose to elect Hamas, to democratically elected, and what you do to them, how you punish them, then you blockade them, you put them in an open air prison, right up until this very day. I mean, it's if democracy was a universal good. Then it should have been allowed to run its course, even in the case of Hamas, regardless of how much you like Hamas, which should teach us that democracy is not a universal good, and it teaches us that democracy is not going to work everywhere. And even in the Muslim world, when they talk about democracy, realistically, what people are asking for is freedom. They're asking for stability. They're asking for the sort of mechanisms put in place that will help to protect and curb corruption in government, no bribery, things like that. Make sure that if I go to court, that my judge is not going to be bribed, into ruling in the favor of my, the defendant or the person who's I'm in court for against, so things like that. That's really what they're asking for, And so, but realistically, stability is probably the most important thing. Most people in the world, I believe, they can really care less what kind of government they have. As long as I'm able to live a dignified existence, I'm able to own property, and my property is protected, I can move freely. among so many other things. I don't think the average person even cares. The most people who even live in so-called democracies don't really understand why democracy works.
Right.
They really don't. And people don't,
Right,
in my opinion. Most people.
Absolutely, and I mean, if you think about, the hypocrisy is so clear. If you look at, to tie it back to oil again, look at who's our number one ally in the Middle East other than Israel is Saudi Arabia, and you have, again, a government that's quite repressive as people. It's not doesn't support dissent. When people stereotype Muslims, unfortunately, because Saudi Arabia is where the holy cities of Mecca and Medina, everyone kind of says, "Oh, that's what Muslims are like." They don't say Turkey, or they don't say Indonesia or Malaysia or Senegal. Right.
Yeah.
They say, "Oh yeah, well that's Muslims," and then they have, they stone more people than ISIS does as part of that's just legal. That's on their law, and then women can't drive, and any intellectual that speaks out against the regime, even critically at all, or any dissenting version of Islam has to be totally underground. And yet that's our number one ally as a USA. You see what I'm saying? So it's like, come on, man. That's my thing. If you just want to be like, look, man, we're the strongest, and there's really nothing you can do about it, because we're gonna take your resources, and if you give us your resources, we'll let you have your little fiefdom, your little kingdom, and do whatever you want. And if you step out of line, we'll replace you. That's just how it's gonna go. We're the gangster, we're the biggest family in town. We're the dons.
Yeah, exactly. No.
And so if you want to say that, say that. We can criticize that and say that's not right. But at least you have some integrity. At least you're honest. Whereas what we do as a nation, as far as a popular discourse, is that we actually, and we're not fooling anyone. That's the whole thing. Iraqis aren't fooled. Palestinians aren't fooled. Even Europeans aren't fooled.
Exactly.
Black and brown people aren't fooled in America, let alone overseas. And so, and even a lot of, look at people that are voting for Obama. They're hoping it's an alternative. People that are voting for someone even more left to him that's claiming socialism now, like Bernie Sanders. They're not. They're sick of this. So a lot of Americans are fed up. But we still, we, and that also gets back to the point of that. The thing about democracy is it's the type of government that demands the most from the people. A democracy can only work if people are deeply educated. If you're in a constitutional monarchy or whatever, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if people don't know what's going on. But in a democracy, if you don't know what's going on, you're actually a danger to society. You're harming everyone. Because amana, if we use it,
because you can be easily manipulated. You can be easily manipulated.
Exactly. And for a democracy to function properly, the people. Have to be well aware of all the issues. Otherwise it's very easy.
It's interesting you mentioned this, the importance of people being aware, and I as you know, I do quite a bit of work in race race theory and things like that, and in particular I've had a concern in the area of sort of racial stratification and how that impacts, I guess you'd say, race taxonomies and how they are utilized for the purpose of racial stratification, social stratification, and in America,
what does that mean?
Well, basically, when we talk about race taxonomy, fundamentally we're just talking about sort of classifications, race categories. Like in America, we know, of course, it's white, and you have black, you have African, now you have Hispanic, you have other, you have so many others, and nowadays they're becoming more and more. But originally the only, you had the choice between white and black, as we know, and of course Native American became one as well. And so the original Americans, in order for you to become an American, you had to prove you're white. Prior to African Americans being given the right to become citizens almost a century later. But under George Washington, the very first Naturalization Act, 1790, that was one of the chief conditions, was that you had to be a white person in order to become an American. Now, of course, time went by and those things have changed, but there's always been a hierarchy in whiteness to begin with, and so on one level, you can't necessarily blame those who immigrated from Europe to America for choosing whiteness as one of the most essential characteristics for sort of enfranchisement in America, and that you're talking about a particular civilization which had just come out of a bloody, more than 1 century sort of religious war, between the Protestants and Catholics, and largely we can say that they lost trust in religion. So religion couldn't be a valid basis for citizenship. So they had to choose something, so they happened to choose whiteness. So basically, when I talk about race stratification or race taxonomies, I'm talking about sort of race or sort of these categories, which fundamentally promote this idea of some degree of genetic homogeneity amongst certain people, but not amongst others. Right. And realistically, the concept of race, from a scientific standpoint, can't really be proven. It's never been. It's a convenient sort of term.
Well, it's not. It's totally discredited. Like maybe there was some.
It's been discredited scientifically, but for most people, they actually take them and perceive of themselves, perceive of these categories as true real categories. Sure. Like, for instance, it's like, you're not really, you ain't really black, you're acting like one of them. You understand? Right. The people have this reaction often to certain types of violations of cultural sort of, coherence, among other things. So like these terms have been invented, and classifications and categories have been invented, and people have appropriated them, and it started as a conception, then become a perception in people, and so we continue to live our lives on the basis of those particular categories, not realizing that in every part of the world you may have a different type of understanding. Like, for instance, if I go to Brazil, I'm not black anymore, for instance, you see. So in Morocco, I'm not black, you understand? So it's just, but in America, especially for Americans, I've noticed that in particular for the poor people, the uneducated people, that there's a tendency to think that their category of being is actually universal. So for instance, the African comes here and, for instance, doesn't show as much concern for the plight of the black man, for instance. Oh, he's a sellout. You follow me? But no, he has a different experience. You see, a different sort of worldview, a different idea about blackness, what it means. Of course, it may be something shared, but his particular background and history is much different. He might enslave you just as fast as a white man enslaved you. You understand? So I think that's an important part of this particular conversation, which has to be brought up as well, because when we don't understand how much we've been constructed by others, their own identities, our own self-perceptions have been given to us by others and by the superstructure or just by the sort of the status quo, then it's easier to manipulate us against one another and divide and conquer us. And it's not to say that we should be pushing for a total elimination for racial categories. I'm not totally certain that I would be in favor of that, because if we were to push for that, fundamentally we're talking about removing people's experiences. But just understand that race is a sociological phenomenon. It's not a biological fact. It's a sociological phenomenon, and as a sociological phenomenon, it is actually real. The experience of race is real. You see, so I can't say blacks have nothing. Why are they complaining? You're not even black anymore. It's like no, you've had your experience of blackness. So whiteness as well is the same thing. They're going to annihilate whiteness, or white people from the planet. You see, so this reaction, to the threat of immigration, is able to sort of trumped and utilized as a tool to divide and conquer. Yeah.
No, I think that's very true, and I think what you say is really important, because a lot of white people, they don't like race being brought up, and well-meaning. They're just like, why do you keep reminding me Black Lives Matter? We're all the same. You know what I mean? They don't want to be reminded of it. And on one level, I think you really have to see it with two eyes. You know, if you have one eye, you can still see, but you have no depth perception, right? Two eyes means you can see the depth. On one level, and like you say, it's would you say sociological and biological?
Right.
Biologically, we're the same race.
Right. Yeah.
But in lived experience, what your skin pigmentation content is, something as trivial as that, has very real consequences. Right. And if we don't acknowledge that, then we do an injustice to people that have a shared history, that have experiences. It's like someone said on Facebook, Twitter, I saw someone post, black brother, he said, it's about 500 years, 7 colonized continents, a genocide, and an enslavement of an entire population too late to start talking about we're all one race.
Right.
You know what I mean? So in a sense, like, you have to acknowledge
the experience. You can't
just say we're all got here the same way. And like, but at the same time, you see, it can get so focused on our differences that we lose sight of the fact that while acknowledging that, we have to have the other eye, which acknowledges that we are the same. And ultimately, for people that have a spiritual perspective on this, we have a spirit, and we believe that there's a transcendent creator, source of all existence, and that our souls incarnated in this realm as a test. And it was along the lines of our differences: tribe, race, class, language, gender, language, etc. That the test would be manifest. So that's how you see who you really are. You know what I mean? Is along these fissures where people are divided. What do you really stand for? And so,
I mean, let me be clear, just because I don't want anyone to really misunderstand what I'm saying. For me, I'm implying, and I think that you said enough to clarify. That when we talk about this idea that how we're the same biologically, that that is not meant to make it seem as if like we are completely the same. Now, of course, saying that we're biologically the same, of course, our systems in our bodies and blood, underneath the skin, we're all the same color. You understand? So, but yes, there are differences in hair texture, there are differences in, skin color and, the size of noses, and lips, things like that does exist. Right, exactly.
Can't jump.
So,
dancing.
Those differences do exist. But when the way that we look at race is that we look at it on a certain sort of a spectrum, like that is, there are extremes in that spectrum. Like for instance, a person, I can be jet black, and I mean almost white. And I'm still black. You understand? In my particular context, when in fact, if we were to put some of those people and this who's in one category next to people of another category, like for instance Mongolian, if you want to use that term, we're going to use Ethiopian, or you're going to use Caucasian, where the different categories, you find that many people in a single category, if not most of them, actually have more in common than the people of other categories than the category they are said to belong to. You see, so I know people who are jet black, and I know others who are almost white. But if you ask them, you call them a white guy, say, I'm black. You see, and so even myself, even though like according to what I was told by geneticists, is that I'm probably a little bit more than 80% sub-Saharan African, that I do have about 16% of European blood. You see, now maybe some other person who's black who has maybe 1% of European blood in it. So of course, they're more like a certain African. But the more I have, the more I may be more like the other particular category. I mean, why is it that we can't call President Barack Obama white? I mean, his mother's white. You see,
he's just as much white as he is black, just as much European as African.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So the whole point being that somebody made a choice for everybody else. Right, exactly. Yeah. Somebody made a choice for everyone else that this guy, he can't be white. He's black. You understand? And and we have to just sort of be aware of that race. it's not a true category. It's a convenient category, but it's not a real category, and it is related to experience as well. And those experiences oftentimes can be very harmful, and have been harmful for certain people, and useful, more beneficial for others. So while we understand that, hopefully it'll make it easier for us to not be easily manipulated when we actually have to all stand up and fight for the same type of causes that we're faced with.
Yeah, that's real. And so, you're an imam, a sheikh, a teacher, a professor. When you're asked, I'm sure you get asked by, non-Muslims as well as Muslims, especially in the wake of these type of terrorist attacks, to try to understand like the phenomena of ISIS. And I mean, do you find that it seems to me that Muslims aren't feeling like I've never heard a Muslim in my entire life that is actually like, ISIS has a good point though. Like everyone seems to be like, these freaking guys, man. Like, and I see some scholars trying to like theologically deconstruct their arguments. But I feel like, and maybe it's just the circles I'm around. I'm not really around a bunch of ISIS sympathizers or people that would even be swayed by that line of argument. But I feel almost like it's kind of missing the point when you're like trying to theologically show from the source text of the Quran and Sunnah why this isn't actually the true religion of Islam. Do you share those sentiments, or what do you?
Well, in terms of like,
I mean, I guess
the desire, the
reflections
impulse
you
to
have
actually to
on
refute
that.
them.
Do you feel like people? I guess non-Muslims are probably looking for a way to understand. Like, okay, I get not all Muslims are terrorists, but like, what is the deal? Like, it keeps happening.
Right.
You know what I mean? And then I don't know about like young Muslims, for instance, in America coming up.
Right.
I can imagine that it's more like an identity thing. Like, man, I got to keep getting reminded that I'm different than everyone else.
Right. Well, I would say a few things about this. I mean, one, I think that the problem of ISIS recruitment is probably much more significant in Europe than it is here in the United States, which is alhamdulillah. And I do think that it has a lot to do with the overall sort of state of Muslims here economically, among other things, which make that the case. There's a certain level of enfranchisement that does exist, and people are not necessarily being, I guess, they're suffering in the way that certain Muslims are in France, or say in England. You start talking about the prison population. You look at 70% prison population. Muslim, or 80% said to be in England. Pakistani. At least that's what I was told. You have to confirm these numbers, but it's clearly is a large level of disenfranchisement, and the populations there are largely poor populations. Whereas in America, we don't have that level of poverty amongst our immigrant Muslim population in particular. And I think, of course, the African American issue is something completely different as well. Whereas it's kind of like we're used to our condition, we're used to our plight, so the issue of refuting ISIS on a theological basis, I personally feel that it's ISIS is not really our concern. I mean, personally, that's why I feel that we in America, we have our own issues, we have our own challenges. And, of course, it's a concern in the sense that, of course, we don't want our youth to be radicalized by the particular element. But I do think that if we do choose to try to offer a type of refutation to the ideology, then it has to be ironclad. It has to be something done, probably even collectively. It can't just be like an individual scholar who gets up, and so, because you have to make sure that your arguments are consistent, that they that they can be easily dismantled, because they can't be flimsy, So, and I think that's in some regards that certain arguments have been very flimsy with regard to the so-called refutation of ISIS, and it gives them the appearance of strength. I think that the ideology of ISIS is a self-destructive ideology, And I feel that if we just left them alone, that it's just a matter of time before it just simply falls apart. That's the way I feel about it personally. The question of why ISIS is doing what it's doing to those outside of his own territory is never asked, you see. And I'm not trying to argue for them, but I do think it's an important question to ask, is that perhaps, and some people have said it, that this is the result of the actions of it's blowback from sort of the actions of Western actors,
right.
Western government
Undoubtedly,
actors.
they step into the vacuum created by the war in Iraq and then of course Syria, the tragedies in Syria. So I mean, undoubtedly, I mean, ISIS, the leaders of ISIS, including the quote unquote caliph, met in a U.S. prison. Fighting against an occupying army called the United States of America. You know what I mean? And the leader, and this is an important point, he was a neighborhood preacher beforehand. Had no history of violence.
Right.
And he may have been a bad guy in the sense he harbored these violent tendencies internally, but he just didn't let them out. Or it may have just, he became that person in the insanity of war. And so I hear what you're saying in the sense that, like, we have to understand the context. But I think one of the reasons why it's difficult is because as Muslims in the West, Muslims in the West are not allowed to just be Muslims in the West. They are everything that happens that any Muslim does, especially against anyone in the West, it's seen as somehow reflective of them in their fifth column and all this type of thing.
Well, I agree that again, for the immigrants, that definitely is a concern that they have to have, and they probably will continue to have. On the other hand, every group of people who has been disenfranchised and has been treated in this particular fashion throughout history, at a certain point they fought back. They refused to cave in to the politics, to the obligation or the sort of coercion of apologetics for what other people are doing, which they have no control over. And I think just a matter of time that Muslims have to make a decision about that. They said, listen, why do I have to apologize? Because even when they do apologize, they're still told that that we don't hear anybody apologizing. Right. So I say, well, why continue to apologize? You have enough sort of apologies on record that anytime everybody asks the question, just throw it out there to them. Say, hey, look, we did this on this day. That why I'm not going to moving forward. I'm not going to do it anymore. And I think that's an important idea to think about. There needs to be a clarification of what our position is. Like, for instance, yourself and myself say, listen, you agree with ISIS? No, I don't agree with ISIS. Period. That's it. There are different types of Muslims. I disagree with them. My Islam I know is something different. This is Islam. So if you're interested in Islam, you can choose that one. You can be distracted by that one, or you can choose the one that I have. If you want to really learn about it, I can tell you what I know about Islam. I can show you where my understanding of Islam comes from. You see, you find it to be very beautiful. You see. But if they're not willing to do that, because if there's a certain amount of intellectual laziness as well on the part of the individual we're trying to actually win over,
or just layers and layers of perception. Yeah. You think about that. Like, if you've been told over and over and over again, this is this is this, someone says, no, it's not that. Right. It's. You're right. There has to be a certain person who has a certain type of intellectual discernment that is developed. It takes a certain type of person to be able to be like, okay, I'm going to hear what you're saying without. I'm going to try to put aside my perspective that I've received for all these years and hear what you're saying. Right. Usually it takes time and time again to break those down. Right. And the sad part is that, I feel like for a lot of Muslims that are, talking to their family members that might not be Muslim, or, their coworkers or classmates or whatever, they might start breaking those things down. Right. And then another thing happens. Right. And how it's presented in the media, and people are like, well, I don't know. Like, you know what I mean? And I guess it really comes down to this, because I agree with you. I mean, it's one of the things that I see is that Muslims literally tripping over themselves to condemn. Right. Apologize. And I understand, like you said, like they're afraid for their families and for their children and for their all that stuff.
Right.
But what I would say is like, look at how reactionary it is. Like until you actually have institutions, including specifically in this instance, until you start to have media, where you put out your own voice on your own terms, then, I mean, sorry. I mean, that's just how it goes. And it's like, another thing that I would say is that, and we were talking about this earlier, is that there's, for the vast majority of Muslims in America, they are actually very assimilated. Like all they want to do is go to their IT job, or you know what I mean, and just mix in with everyone else, and like tell the same jokes and this whole thing. And when an act like this happens, immediately they're reminded that you're but are you really one of us? Like you're something different. And this is problematic for the fact that what you're basically saying is Islam doesn't actually offer a different paradigm. Islam actually doesn't critique the dominant materialist consumption paradigm. It doesn't critique this or that thing. I'm just like you. Right? I'm a cog in the machine. I'm a cog in the matrix. And then all of a sudden everyone's like, no, you're not. You're not a cog in the matrix. And like, yes, I am. I'm a cog in the matrix just like you. You see what I'm saying? The problem is that, what about a principled engagement? You know what I mean? And that's kind of the sad thing.
No, exactly. So at the end of the day, people don't know anything about Islam. You're not teaching them anything about Islam. And all they know about Islam is what they see on television, because you're not practicing in Islam, yourself. You're being just like them. And I think it's important, especially for our youth, that our youth have to understand that, yes, on one level, Muslims are just like everybody else. I mean, when we think about it as a collective, we have good Muslims, we have bad Muslims. You have good non-Muslims, you have bad non-Muslims. You see, so we're just like everyone else on that level. But on another level, Muslims are not just like everyone else. You understand? So I mean, Muslims are special people. I mean, and not in an arrogant way. You see, but we believe to ourselves to be special people. You see, chosen by God on a certain level, and of course, not in the level like the same way like the Jews perhaps would generally think of themselves.
But in the sense of principles, like there is something that you uphold. It means Islam is not just an identity, and I think that's another thing that you see. Like a lot of people now say, "I'm a secular Muslim. I'm an atheist Muslim." Like, what does that even mean?
Atheist Muslim.
You know what I mean? Because it's like you really hear that, and it's like. I mean, I'm not here to police whoever wants to say they're Muslim or not. That's not my business. But I understand it as a set of a paradigm about the world, an understanding, an action, and an inward reality, right? As you know, the kind of using the Buddhist terms, it's kind of like, right action, right perception, right understanding, and then right inward spiritual state. That's Islami man ihsan. And we're all striving for it. We're not all perfect, but again, exactly what you're saying in the sense of like, it's a beautiful, powerful tradition that's transformative. It's a path of awakening.
Exactly.
And I think what you have is two extremes within the Muslim community. Is that one which is like, we just assimilate, we're just like everyone else, and then you have this rejectionists. We hate the dominant paradigm, the West, the this, whatever it is going to be, and a small fraction of those are violent. Vast majority of these people are not violent, but a lot of it is really insecurity. Because they're not successful in the dominant paradigm, maybe, or because they never fit in, they weren't successful with the girls, or whatever. Like a lot of it, you could really just break it down to real stuff like that, insecurity, or just ego. You know what I mean? Nafs. And what about a third path, like the, ummatan wasata, like the middle path, which is that, no, we have a path that talks about a way of being and a way of understanding and seeing the cosmos, and a set of teachings, ethical teachings about justice and the harmony of
Right.
brotherhood of man.
Right.
And
Yeah.
we are going to critique based on principles, not on identity things. So it's like when people say, well, we can get behind Muslim causes. Well,
Right. Right.
Preserving the environment, that's a Muslim cause.
Right,
Because
exactly.
that's according to the
right.
principles.
That's right. Yeah.
And Palestine's a Muslim cause, not because it's Muslims,
Right, exactly.
but because it's injustice.
Right, exactly.
And
Right.
Tibet is a Muslim cause because that's what's happening to the Tibetan people is wrong.
Right, exactly.
And until that becomes the dominant thrust
Right.
and the dominant discourse, and then when you have your own institutions and your own media, and you can say we're offering a different paradigm. Then all of a sudden, you take back the discourse and you can actually give people something.
Right. We spend too much time like talking about what Islam is not, and speaking about ISIS is fundamentally still doing the same thing. That when we're all of our time, if we're being absorbed with trying to clarify that ISIS does not represent Islam, we're still not telling people, what is the proper representation of Islam. And I personally feel that the more that we highlight the prophetic ethos, alayhi salatu wasalam, then it will be easier for us to, for us to make the claim that this is what true Islam is. That the prophetic ethos, what the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam did fundamentally was true Islam. He himself was the Quran walking. So the more they know about Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam, the more they would truly understand Islam. But we have all these other sort of nutcases and other types of people out there that make that particularly challenging. And then also I would say that again, if I come back to the issue of race, that I think that with a lot of immigrants, which actually makes it even more difficult for them too, is that many of them coming to America, they themselves seem to accept that the truly acceptable identities or American identities are either the black or the white identity. And it seems as if that they're forced to make a choice. I either have to be white or I have to be black, And of course, everybody would want to be white. I probably want to be white too if I was an immigrant too. It's like, because everybody wants to integrate up, in any given society. Because they see the blacks as integrating down, then they're going to choose being black, being white. So, but it's as if they don't realize that those are not all the only options they have.
Right.
They can choose to be what they are. And I think that the more that they start to demand from those people who want to treat them or mistreat them, that listen, I'm an American too, and my way of being an American is just authentic as yours is. And then the more that you demand that, and I demand from you respect, that this is what I am. I'm an American like this. I don't have to be an American like you want me to be an American, Then, they'll gain more respect. And then, it'll be easier for them to
ironically, that's what Americans respect.
Right, exactly.
When people that say that, it's like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
And the kind of apologetic thing, it's like, ooh, I'm kind of... A friend of mine told me he was a Muslim convert, and he has his brother who's not a Muslim. And, he said he was trying to tell his brother or he said some of his friends were trying to talk to his brother, not all Muslims are terrorists, not all Muslims. And his brother's like, I know, man, I'm not stupid. Like, but you're starting to give me doubts.
Yeah, right.
Right.
It's
so important to you to tell me that I'm like, well, I didn't think that. I mean, the average American is not,
Yeah, and Muslims sometimes think that Americans are not very intelligent.
Right.
I mean, and I think that works against us too. Right. We would think that, okay, well, new convert or a person, they're you introducing them to Islam, as if you can say something to them and they won't notice like sort of contradictions. And and I remember like one time after Jummah, there's an individual who goes to he's not Muslim, he attends Jummah, one particular masjid here in the area on a regular basis. And I remember one time he came to me after Jummah and he said, hey, listen, I had a guy said to me, I asked him like, what's the word kafir mean, and so I said, what do you think it means? What have you heard? And so he said to me, well, I so and so, and he told me that it meant like those Muslims who go out and they do violent things. That's what a kafir means. And I said to him, and I told the brother, he wasn't Muslim, but I told him, I said, He was a white guy too. And I said to him, I said, listen, kafir is a word which is utilized, to refer to anybody who is not a Muslim, who shows hostility towards Islam. But then also sometimes it's utilized to refer to anybody who's not a Muslim. And I was just very frank with him. And he was like, I don't know, why did he lie to me? I mean, why did understand that he was really hurt? So as if that they wouldn't, sort of find out, or he probably already knew, and even before he asked the other, the Muslim brother, this immigrant brother, he asked him this question, and that was the answer he got. So you just got to be who you are. You have to, people don't have to accept Islam. Islam is, you tell them, listen, this is what Islam is. As long as you know that is what Islam is, and you know that this is something that's part of what Islam is, say this is what Islam is. And they can accept it or reject it. But we don't twist it up and distort the words of God in order to bring people into the religion, only to have them find out tomorrow that they were lied to and they were misled.
I guess one of the other one of the other points you see is that, you're a professor at American Muslim College, right? And you have, some of the teachers, professors, founders as some of the most influential Muslims, not only in America, but in the world, right? If they come out with these lists of top 500 most influential Muslims. And there were, a few of them always in the top. And I guess, what do you feel that the role of the scholars is in all of this? And do you feel, what is the way forward as, kind of the ulama, the representatives of the...
Right. Well, for me, the role of the scholar is to provide the masses with the critical skills, intellectual skills they need in order to apprehend, interpret, and navigate their society, their lives. You see, and what I mean by that is the opposite of sort of just lording over them and sort of just kind of force feeding them, or sort of just spoon feeding them as well. Force feed or spoon feed; those are two extremes. And it's not about. It shouldn't be about controlling people or gathering followers and things like that. It's more about liberating the masses. The masses should feel that after I sit with you, I can walk away and walk out this door, and I have something practical that I can implement in my life. There's some tool that I acquired from you yesterday or today that I can actually now utilize in order to analyze my world, analyze my reality, and actually I can protect myself from anything that may be harmful coming my way. I think that personally that is the role of the scholar, and that being the case, I guess you'd say that the scholar helps you to sort of reality to be illuminated, for other people's, the unlearned, and hopefully in a very simple way. Give simple examples, perhaps, but some people take a little bit, some issues take a little bit more study and a bit more time and mastery before people can really sort of see like what is actually real and what's not real in their world. So I think that is fundamentally the role, and the way that I see personally the situation in the world right now is, number one, the world is largely controlled and influenced by an economic elite, a very strong minority economic elite. It is said that up to 50% of the world's resources and wealth is owned by some hundreds, maybe a few hundred people, 300 to 400 people. And that is, like right now, 50% of the world's, resources owned by them. And when you look in the Quran, it talks about Pharaoh and how Pharaoh, he divided the masses and he made them into different factions. And he took a particular faction of them and he oppressed them. But he divided them to begin with. And the way that we're ruled is fundamentally in the same way that you find it Pharaoh has been ruled. So if you classified us, so again, these taxonomies, so it could be racial class, it can be social class,
Religion.
that when those individuals actually want to increase their wealth and hide it from the masses, what they do is they'll incite the masses against one another on the basis of those differences, or on the basis of their appetites, their cravings, their emotional cravings, as well as their sort of the basic carnal appetites. That they'll sort of manipulate them through those particular things, and in the meantime, they're running away with all the wealth, and so they'll tell the poor white man, for instance, that hey, the reason why you're poor is that you got these immigrants. They're coming over. They're taking your jobs. Or your jobs being shipped out of the country to these other poor people. These people that you understand, and so you should have a problem with that. Or you better make sure that you don't mix with these particular people. They're going to corrupt the purity of your blood. You see, so those are the type of things that are utilized to control people. And I think when more and more people realize that's fundamentally is what's happening in our world, then I think that it'll be easier for us to work on ways to combat a lot of this injustice that we have.
That's beautiful, and that's a good note, man, because looking at the East versus the West, the Muslim world versus the Christian world, the Western world, again, like, it's like someone was asked, who was it? A really beautiful anecdote. They said, who won between Mayweather and Pacquiao? It was Dave Chappelle. They asked Dave Chappelle, who won between Mayweather and Pacquiao? He said the promoters. That's who won.
Right, that's right.
He'll break you off something, and it might be a big crumb, but it's a crumb compared to what they're getting.
Right.
And so, when we allow these divisions, whether they be religious or racial or nationality, to divide us, we're playing into the game. And I think the beauty of technology, and technology has a lot of ugly sides to it too, but the beauty of it is that we're really becoming a global village.
Right.
A lot of people coming up, they got friends all over the world. They've stepped off a plane on different continents. They met people. They broke bread with people. And their neighborhoods are filled with people of all different racial backgrounds, ethnic, class. And it's really hard to demonize people once you've humanized them. Right. Once you see their human.
That's right.
And so I really feel that, hopefully, inshallah, and, it's really efforts like what we're trying to do with this type of these mediums, like the podcast, is just to share the sanity, the sane voice, because you might not hear it on Fox News. Right. You might not hear it, but you
definitely won't hear it there.
And, but I think people are just, and that's why I wanted to have you on as a Muslim scholar, because I feel like people are Muslim and non-Muslim just craving to hear like a sane, rational voice that comes from someone who's committed to a spiritual path.
Yeah, I'm glad you considered me to be a sane, rational voice.
I mean, I have some doubts, but alhamdulillah. Thank you.
Inshallah.